All right, what's up? Hello, you two. Welcome in. See if I can make sure my mic is positioned as well as possible here for you guys. See, this is the work that I go through. I'm trying to get this audio right for you. Anyway, welcome in tonight. We have a lot to talk about, man. There's been a lot that's happened in the last week. I didn't get to you guys on Sunday. I was doing K-State baseball over the weekend. Threw my weekend out of whack, and I've been itching to get back on the mic and talk about some of the things going on right now. For instance, Mark Emmert no longer going to be the president of the NCAA. That's pretty low, honestly, on the list here, and like that is kind of crazy when you think about it. That will have some reverberations for the Big 12, all around college athletics, obviously. And that is, look, I anticipate we'll get to that a little bit today, but I don't think that's going to be one of the main topics today because we have so much going on. I actually gleaned a little bit of information. Now, I don't ever proclaim to be as plugged in as the guys that you see on Twitter, the Ross Dellingers of the world, everybody who works with the Athletic. I don't claim to be as plugged in as like Max Olson, for instance, right, in the Big 12. But I did hear a name on the Big 12 commissioner front that was very interesting to me. That's one that I have not seen like any talk about anywhere else over the weekend. So I wanted to share that with you. But really, the big news of the day is the fact that you have Cincinnati, Houston, UCF, all now reportedly expected to be joining the Big 12 for the 2023-24 school year, which is what most of us had assumed, but is a year earlier than what the bylaws would require as far as the AAC is concerned. And we also have a report that it could be finalized very quickly. Like we could know that that is going to be a fact here within the next week. So we can break that down. Plus a little bit of an update on what's going to be going on with some Big 12 meetings that are coming up next week, which I think is also something to watch out for. And something that we also kind of already knew was on the docket coming up here, but something to keep in mind as far as where that's going, because it's divisions. Again, this is a hot button topic. Everybody loves divisions. I hate the idea of divisions. Everybody, when I say loves divisions, loves coming up with their own divisions and plotting and scheming, to make the league whatever it is that they want. I'm not a huge fan of that, but I suppose we can have that conversation once again. We have Big 12 transfer news that I think is pretty significant, especially on the football side. Now, it's a basketball one. I hesitate to say it's as significant because it sounds like, it's one of these situations where player very easily could be just winding up back at the school, but I want to touch on both of those. We had spring games over the weekend. That was one of those things I was about to, if I would have done a show on Sunday, Sooner fans, Oklahoma fans, I would have come on and said, I was actually very impressed by Oklahoma fans, the turnout and what that can actually do for your program. I think if you're going to do a spring game, you better do it well these days. And Oklahoma did it about as well as you possibly could. Now, it didn't actually net any recruiting wins really for Oklahoma so far, at least as of yesterday when I had kind of scoped that out and checked that out. But I still think it's a very impressive showing for the Sooners, even though there are still incidents. There was yet another incident of Oklahoma media members and fans being very salty about Lincoln Riley, but I digress. We saw a lot of crowd comparisons between USC and Oklahoma, and you guys know how I feel about that. Thank goodness we have so much else going on to talk about that I don't have to spend another show harping on that. So there's your docket for what's going on today. There's the outline. What's up to everybody in the chat? I see Christopher, who was the first one in here. I see Samuel checking in from New Jersey. How about that? I see Joe. What's up, Charles? Inside Center 1776. Juan. What's up, Juan? I feel like it's been a minute. West Virginia guy. Ron. Rob S. Pistols firing. DR Gat. Gregory. Alec. Everybody. Thank you for being here. I see improved audio tonight with a question mark. I hope that means that it does sound a little bit better. I just tried to get the mic a little bit closer to you here. I'm about at my wit's end with anything else that I can do to make the audio better. So hopefully that does sound better for all of you guys. I will remind all of you that are in here one thing you can do to help me out that does not cost you a cent. It is literally free. All you have to do is just click the mouse. I'm telling you, it'll burn a calorie or something. If I tell you it's good for your heart, will you do it? Just go like the video. Liking the video will help me out with the algorithm and supports what I'm doing here at the channel. You can also do what some folks have already done, and that is donate by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. Not only will that donate to the channel and the work that I'm doing here, support that. It'll get your question or comment up to the top of the chat, supersede everything else. And like some people have already done, that's where we're going to start, as opposed to the outline that I just gave you, because they were so kind as to donate. So again, $ below the chat box where it says say something if you would like to donate and support the channel. Hey, Alex says he did notice it sounding a bit better. Okay, all right. Hey, we're making progress. We're making progress. Tommy is first in with a donation tonight. What's up, Tommy? Tommy says, been a minute since I caught one of these live. Think the exit of Bowlesby could lead to a sooner exit of UT and OU. Also, go Frogs. All right, Tommy, TCU fan. I feel like we don't have a lot of TCU flavor in here, Tommy, so thank you for being here. I think potentially, but we still just we don't hear anything about it. It's so hard for me to give a definitive answer on that front. I know this is kind of a lame answer, but this is where, again, I will just admit to you where I'm plugged in and where I'm not. Honestly, it seems like nobody is really plugged in on what's going on with Texas and Oklahoma. I would say potentially just because there's a new variable in the equation, right? Like, what will the new commissioner want to do? Maybe the new commissioner will come in and say, like, hey, I'd rather just wipe my hands clean of this. Let's cut them a deal, take our money, get them moved on, and let me start plotting a path forward with what we're going to do next. Bob Bowlesby would be the guy who would have obviously more of an emotional investment here, more of an emotional, you would think anyway, urge to be like, hey, let's hold their feet to the fire. Let's make it as awkward and uncomfortable as possible for them, because he felt personally betrayed. And we've seen that in writing, and that been reported by Max Olson before, that Bowlesby felt very betrayed by Joe Castiglione in particular. Everybody expected it out of Texas. They did not expect it out of Oklahoma. Joe Castiglione had been a longtime friend of Bob Bowlesby, and he felt very betrayed. So I think with those hard feelings, yeah, maybe there's a case there to say, hey, it's more likely with Bowlesby as the commissioner that Oklahoma and Texas totally get their feet held to the fire, and the new commissioner might be more willing to cut them a deal. But we just don't know. It's so hard without knowing who the new commissioner is going to be. I think it's just going to be a TBD. So to answer the question, long story short, could it affect it? Yes. Will it affect it? I just don't know. And I don't think we'll have much of an idea until we find out specifically who the commissioner is. But it's a very good question. It's a very good question. And one, that's kind of the $1 million question with the league right now. That's the $1 million question everybody wants to know the answer to at the moment. So thank you. Really appreciate that, Tommy, for checking in with that. Next up, Robbie. What's up, Robbie? Robbie says, just saying hi. Glad I was able to catch this live. I'm glad that you're here too, Robbie. Thank you. Great K-State fan who follows the channel. It does feel like it's been a minute, Robbie. So thank you for being here, and thank you for the donation. Joe, what's up, Joe? Thank you for the generous donation. Joe says, what's up with K-State this year in football? Will they have a winning record? Oh, much more than that. I am pretty bullish on K-State this year being an 8 or a 9 win team, 8 or 9 win regular season team. I realized last year they were 8-5, but 7-5 regular season. I think they'll be 8-4, 9-3. Pretty optimistic on Adrian Martinez. His health is ahead of schedule right now. K-State did not have a spring game because the overall health of the team was not in very good shape, and they didn't want to do that. And honestly, I'm kind of okay with that. If you can't do a spring game up big like Oklahoma did, I'm always going to be okay with just punting on the idea of it. But I think as long as K-State can stay relatively healthy, their front line should be good enough to do some real damage in the Big 12. Depth is where the concern is going to come in. But yeah, I'm anticipating 8 or 9 wins. I'm slightly higher on K-State this year than I have been the last few years. Big part of that, obviously, too, is Deuce Vaughn. I think they have one of the 5 to 10 most dynamic players in college football in Deuce. So with all that being said, I do expect some pretty big things out of K-State. And it's been a little while, actually, since I've talked or thought about football extensively with the Cats, because it's been all basketball, and recruiting is very exciting right now with K-State hoops. But appreciate those donations out of the blocks here. Oh, I see Robbie, Deuce Vaughn, Dark Horse, Heisman, book it. Yeah, Dark Horse probably still fits, but I've seen at least enough buzz about Deuce and the Heisman and where his position is at nationally that we might venture into territory where, Dark Horse doesn't totally fit because he's well known enough. But anyway, good comments there. Good start to the chat. Thank you, everybody. If you want to be like all of these all-stars and donate to support the channel and make sure your question or comment gets seen by me, you can click the $ below the chat box where it says say something. And if you are watching this taped and you want to support the channel You can do so on Venmo. It's John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. So here's what we got today. Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF are all expecting to be Big 12 members for the 2023-24 school year. That was actually reported. The first report that got out there about that today was from John Rothstein, who apparently now is with FanDuel, which I did not know. That was a lesson learned for me today. But you typically think of Rothstein from the college basketball world, like he is Mr. College Basketball. He put out this report, and I'm just going to read you directly from it. It says, well, several sources directly connected to Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF told FanDuel that there are many logistical things to work through in order to join the Big 12 in 2023. All three programs are still operating with the notion that the upcoming 22-23 season will be their last year in the American Athletic Conference. A source close to the AAC told FanDuel that conversations are ongoing with the exit fees for Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF. So remember about the exit fees. Standard exit fee, if you gave the correct notice, would be $10 million. Mike Oresco has said he's willing to work with them, willing to cut them a deal. You would anticipate that's going to be north of $10 million. I think most people feel like north of $10 million, south of $20 million is probably about where that would fall, somewhere in between there for those schools. None of this is like shocking or surprising, but it is the first time that we've seen like a legitimate report, more so than just maybe some speculation or hearsay toward the back end of a story. This is like a legitimate, very acclaimed, very respected media member putting his name on this as a report that those schools are expecting it, which, I mean, I think is nothing but good news if you're most of the population here, which would be not Texas and Oklahoma fans. I think the only concern that you would have about this is if you're Texas or Oklahoma being like, okay, God, like it's more likely now that we're gonna have to go play these awkward games at BYU, play an awkward game at Houston, potentially get smoked by Cincinnati. That is the only real downside here. If you're the Big 12, the new Big 12, quote unquote, the left behind 8, like get these schools in here, man. Let's make it happen. Like everybody's kind of moved on at this point, I think, and just like ready to see what the new league is going to be like. Bring it on. And I will admit that it's exciting to me to like read that out loud and just be like, oh, so like next year would be the last year of this old Big 12 as we know it. That is crazy. It seems like it's coming up faster than you would have expected. And all of this will be here faster than we all expected, just because I think of the way all of this works anyway. So it's exciting. It's good news to see that legitimized, because things could get real tricky there. If you're BYU, obviously, we know is already confirmed to be in for the 23 season. If you had that where BYU's there, the other schools aren't, it could just create a little bit of awkwardness. And it's already next week. We know that the Big 12 is going to be meeting to talk about divisions and how they're going to try and schedule all this out. That just gets even worse if it's like BYU's coming in. Maybe Oklahoma and Texas are there, maybe not, but then you can't get the AAC schools in. It's just good to know that progress is being made there. It's good to know that, according to Rothstein's report, the buyout, the exit fees rather, are being discussed. So I take that all as very positive. Things are moving in the right direction. And it just, there are a lot of things in motion. I mean, think about all the moving parts right now with the Big 12. Your new commissioner coming up. These schools are paving their way forward. Texas and Oklahoma is the one thing we don't really know about right now, but it just feels like a lot of things are pushing us to a new era of the Big 12 sooner rather than later. And that is good. That is good, because there was at least a chance. You know, if Oresco didn't want to play ball, if these schools didn't feel like they had the money to front the cost right now, if the Big 12 had just stuck with Bowlesby, if he didn't want to get out of there and retire, like there were a lot of ways this could have gone south, more so than what it is right now, and just keep the whole process a little constipated instead of moving, which right now it's moving. So I'm very glad to see that. There's another nugget from that report, but I'm going to get to some of the donations here really quick. Juan, what's up, Juan? I said it's been a minute since I feel like I've seen you, Juan. Great to have you back around on this live. Juan says, super excited about Houston and the other three joining in 2023. I hope Texas stays in and waits for us. Yeah, I mean, that's another part of this. So I guess I shouldn't do this as much. I address the channel as like thinking of it predominantly as fans of the 8 schools that were left behind after Texas and Oklahoma bolted or decided to bolt. But a lot of people in here, BYU fans, Cincinnati fans, UCF fans, Houston fans, you guys should be thrilled by this. Yes, like the most exciting crew should obviously be that group, because nothing against the AAC, but the Big 12 is a much more exciting proposition. That's a much more exciting possibility. and especially if you can get your parting shot in at Texas or Oklahoma on the way out. Houston in particular, look, Houston got their crack at Oklahoma not that long ago, right? I imagine Houston would absolutely love to go play some games against Texas. I mean, I'll ask you this, like, how much would you have loved a shot at Texas last year? Like, go roll into DKR, Texas Memorial Stadium last year, where, by the way, Kansas won in football. So Houston's with an 11-win team and Dana Holgorsen, who really had that thing rolling, would have had a great chance to go win that game. And, how excited. That's just one of those games. Like, Texas seemingly is leaving because some of the reporting that we saw, like, the fans don't like the games against Iowa State, KU, K-State, et cetera. They don't get excited. They don't get fired up, using that somewhat as a crutch for all these 7-5 seasons that they fought out there, or in the case of last year, 5-7. They would not be geared up or geeked up to play Houston. Certainly not, especially when they're on their way out of the conference with the SEC looming. That's a dream scenario. A dream scenario for the Houston, UCF, Cincinnati, BYUs of the world. We know that BYU can go smack Texas around. We've already seen that. But that was Taysom Hill, right? Taysom Hill, who just ran all over Texas once upon a time. But, if you're one of these schools, you're like, dude, Texas or Oklahoma would not be fired up. They're just going to be upset that they're playing these weird games that they still count as conference games. And they're just going to be looking forward to what they have coming up in the SEC. They're very vulnerable. We can go beat them and get our jollies off beating them. And the rest of the league, by the way, would support the hell out of you for that, because you want to induce as much humiliation on those two schools on their way out of the league and be able to take your pot shots on Twitter, right? And get the Twitter fingers going. So, yeah, Juan, if I were you, I'd be super fired up about this news. If I were a BYU fan, I'd be very fired up about this. I did a BYU radio hit last week, which was really fun, by the way. Shout out to those guys that had me on. So that was cool. Respect to BYU fans. BYU radio was really fun. BYU, I would think, would be thrilled to go play those games. Cincinnati, riding high with confidence. UCF, not afraid of freaking anybody. What if UCF gets to go play a game against Dillon Gabriel? I mean, think about that. Like, what if the news today means that we are closer to a game between Dillon Gabriel and his old team, UCF? Dillon Gabriel playing for Oklahoma and his old team, UCF. Sign me up for that. Sign me up for that. Gabriel, by the way, Sooner fans, a little shaky. Beginning of that spring game, right? Bad interception. A little shaky. Just saying. I would love to see Houston go get their crack. So appreciate the comments, Juan. I think you should be thrilled, dancing in the streets about the news today. Joe, appreciate the donation. Thank you, Joe. Joe says, love to see Houston beat Texas in football. As do I. As do we all, right? As do we all. I would love to see, an old Southwest Conference battle there between Texas and Houston. And last year, again, Houston, I'm sure, would have been the betting favorite in that game, judging by what Texas was for most of the year. So, yeah, I think we're all right there with you, except for maybe what's my guy's name? That Chad, right? Chad is usually in the chat. I don't see Chad in the chat tonight. But if Chad were here, he would be the one to abstain from that. I don't think he would enjoy watching Houston beat Texas in football. He's usually shaking things up in the chat. James, I don't see a comment here. I just see the donation. So thank you for that, James. If I'm missing your comment, James, make sure that you get back in. I do see James says, go UH. Would love for UT to have to play in Houston before they exit. I'm sensing a theme here. That Houston fans are pretty fired up about this news. You guys deserve it, and you don't get enough shine probably on this channel or in the conversation with everybody coming to the Big 12 right now. So get in here, man. Let's brainstorm how this is going to go. Let's daydream about how this is going to go with you guys. I love thinking about Dana Holgorsen going in and just clowning Steve Sarkisian. I love the thought of Dana Holgorsen clowning him. Let's be honest here. Can we have this as an honest conversation? I see Derek Young, my boy DY, in here. Can we have this as an honest conversation? Is there much difference between Steve Sarkisian and Dana Holgorsen? Legitimately, is there much difference between Dana Holgorsen and Steve Sarkisian? I mean, Holgorsen, what was his best season at West Virginia? Did they have a double-digit win season? Did they have like a 10-win season with Will Greer and company? I feel like was he even there with Gino like right before they? God, I'm trying to remember how all that worked. Anyway, the point is, I feel like there's not a whole heck of a lot of difference between those coaches, and it would be great to see Dana Holgorsen go knock off Steve Sarkisian, who Texas, who can hire basically anybody in the world, went out to get and paid all this money to get rid of Tom Herman to just wind up with Sark, who look to steal a term from the kids. I feel like is pretty mid. I feel like it's pretty mid. I think Sark is pretty mid. Holgerson at the Power 5 level, like Big 12 level, fairly mid, but okay. And as Derek points out, one wasn't fired for drinking at practice. So yes, that is a fair point. That is a fair point, DY. Anyway, fun topic there. I'm glad to jump in here with you, Houston fans. I will celebrate with you. I'll tailgate with you. If you guys play Texas, man, somebody invite me to a tailgate there. I'll get my butt down to Houston and I will tailgate with you guys for a Texas Houston game. Let's see. I see John. I'm trying to get caught up here. John with a donation. John, how does the NAIA make their money for sports? Just wondering. My son played for the Bethany Swedes. How can they survive? Thanks, man. All right. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm out over my skis there. I shout out to the Bethany Swedes, the Fighting Matt Walters. But I don't know. I don't know enough about that situation. I wish I could tell you more. You would have to check. I don't know. Well, Matt Walters would be a great source to ask about that. Maybe I should be more educated on that, and maybe somebody can help you out in the chat. But I don't know. I do know the Bethany Swedes were in the news this week for putting paint thinner. If you guys saw the story about the baseball team that put paint thinner in the water cooler of the other baseball team and then lost by like 31 runs. It was like 33-2 or something. That was Bethany, I do believe, Bethany and Kansas Wesleyan. So it was a newsworthy week for the Swedes. But I do apologize. I wish I could help you out a little bit more there on that. Michael says, loved hearing you on BYU with Ben Criddle. Ben Criddle, thank you, Michael. That is who it was. That was the BYU radio show that I was on. It was a lot of fun, man. Those guys were great. Let me go on for a while about Bill Snyder. Like, we talked Big 12 in general. We talked Antoine Davis, some Big 12 hoops recruiting right now. So it was a blast. It was a really good time. All right, here's the other bit of news to come out of the reports today about Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. So Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated he was kind of piggybacking on the Rothstein report. Rothstein report. I always get it mixed up. John Rothstein. Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated said, one, that next week the main topic of Big 12 meetings will be what to do about divisions. Now with a real legitimate expectation of multiple years of 14 teams. And the thing that sticks out to me about that is that a couple of weeks ago when we were seeing the reporting about, hey, the Big 12 is going to discuss divisions, it was always about like, they're going to discuss how to do divisions. They're going to discuss what the divisions will be. This says what to do about divisions as opposed to what the divisions will be. That's a big difference because to me, that makes it seem like it's more open to the possibility that there won't be divisions, which is what I would like to see. Now, I understand with 14 teams, that's pretty tricky and awkward. So if there is a temporary solution where you're having to do something like that, okay, I'm open to that. I just like long-term, what you're going to want is 1 and 2 playing every single year in the Big 12 championship game. And that seems very feasible. You have support from other schools across the NCAA to get the rule changed on that so that you could do that. And I mean, hell, Mark Emmert is leaving anyway. So like, does the NCAA have any power? Is anybody paying any attention to the transfer portal in basketball right now and $400K and Porsches being handed out to, leading scorers on basketball teams NIL wise right now? Like it's the wild, wild west out there. I can't imagine that there would be anything that would actually hold that back from happening. So don't do it. Like, don't go to divisions. It just drives me nuts. I don't want to see that happen in any way, shape, or form at all. And it sounds like that, at least now, would be more on the table. But the other part of this is like, will they get it all ironed out next week? Is this going to be a tease? I feel like I actually have a little bit of just too many flashbacks to college football playoff discussions and expansion discussions there, where I feel like every time I see this, there's going to be meetings next week about this. I am just skeptical that anything actually gets done. Like, I'm skeptical that we do actually see anything tangible come out of that, because for so long with the playoff stuff, it was like, nothing happens. Well, they're going to go meet. Well, nothing happened. Nobody can agree on anything. We'll see how unified the Big 12 seems to be on that topic. It still feels like the Big 12 is relatively unified as a league, but there have been the rumblings that popped up after basketball season once again out of Stillwater, out of Lawrence. I mean, Kansas message boards right now think they're going to be a package deal with USC to the Big Ten. Like the rumor mill has started heating back up, and Kansas fans obviously are on quite a high with the national championship. So the arrogance is going to be running extra high there in terms of thinking where their place in the college athletics world is going to be. Does any of that upset the apple cart in terms of trying to get something done for how they're going to handle divisions and come to a consensus on this and what they're going to do? I think that will be an interesting thing to monitor there. But the other part of this, Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated followed up on that John Rothstein report and said negotiations are expected to be finalized next week for Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. So that's talking about like negotiating exit fees, dotting I's, crossing T's, expected to be done next week. Okay, that's exciting. Like, we're talking about Houston, Texas football games. That's good. That means that this is really moving. And I guess this will also reiterate the point that I just feel like all of these kind of bureaucratic things always move at a snail's pace. I just expected that would also move very slow. I didn't think we would see this confirmed this quickly, but I would guess that a lot of this is moving much faster now that we're out of basketball season. Like, yes, spring sports are going on. No disrespect to any spring sports. I happen to love college baseball. But it's not the same beast and behemoth for everybody in terms of what it is that they have to pay attention to as football and basketball. So now is the time where you would start to see just more free time available for people to be meeting and talking about these things. So it does stand to reason that these will be moving quicker and getting closer to being done right now. So, hey, we could be sitting here next week at this time doing the show next Wednesday with the news that officially Cincy, Houston, and UCF will all be on board with BYU to be in tow for the league in the 23-24 season, which bring it on. Let's go. So let's go start seeing some new places. I'm ready to go start seeing some new locations in the league, some new rivalries develop, all of that stuff. Get the ball rolling. Get the ball rolling. Okay. I will remind everybody once again, if you want to donate and get your question or comment to the top of the chat, you can do so by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. Chat box, say something, $. That's how you get your question or comment. You can control the chat, get it to my attention up at the top there by doing that. Plus, just support the work that I'm doing here to bring you Big 12 content each and every week. And if you're watching this taped, you can donate John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo as well. Hit me up on Twitter at JLKurtz as well if you want to get in contact with me if you are watching this taped. Juan, if things get finalized next week, when might they announce plans? If you're meaning like plans for divisions, that's a very good question. I think so much of that will just depend on like how unified they are. I would think that divisions is something where there would be quite a few opinions on what to do there, even though it seems very obvious to me that the right thing, like long term, once the league is back down to 12, is just just scrap them. Just don't do it. Come up with your little, they're not really pods, but come up with your couple of cross division rivalry games, whatever. And just make it happen from there. Like, make sure that you play 2 or 3 teams every single year that you want to play, and then do the scheduling beyond that. That would be my preference, but this seems like I've seen all the opinions that you guys have and most people seem to have when it comes to this, and they're very all over the board. So I would think that it probably does take a little while to get like an official announcement on what is going to happen there. I hope I'm pleasantly surprised, and I'm pleasantly surprised about the news that we got today, that things seem to be headed there sooner rather than later. But I would imagine that it still takes a decent amount of time on that. Now, hopefully, I would say this one, like, I would think there's a good chance they would have a plan in place before we get to football season next year, where everybody has this off time and the summer. I would think that's going to provide a lot of time to get it figured out. And the Big 12 has said that they want to be pretty, because the other thing you have to keep in mind here is like they're having these discussions without the guy who's going to be the new commissioner. So you're also maybe having to wait on the new commissioner to come in. I'd imagine they'd want to get his blessing and seal of approval on a decision of that magnitude. But the Big 12 has also said that they wanted to have a commissioner in place well before football season next year. The timeline that they were talking about would have that in place well before football season next year. So I think we'll know something going into the fall. I think we would know what the plan is going to be on that. And I'm sure we'll all be thrilled about it and not argue about it or have differing opinions or discussions about it at all. Juan says, sorry, I meant plans on exit fees and schedules for the 2023 season. Okay, fair enough. So exit fees, I think that's a part that it sounds like we could find out next week. Exit fees, I think you could know next week. At least based on, I'm just reading into the reporting from Ross Dellinger there, and that is the part where like it's somewhat interesting to me, but obviously it's much more interesting to you as a Houston fan. If you're a UCF fan, BYU, well, not a BYU fan, they don't have to worry about that, but Cincinnati, Houston, or UCF, you're going to be more concerned about that, what the exit fee is going to be. As long as it is in that 10 to 20 range, like I don't foresee that being a major problem. Certainly UCF postures itself like that won't be a problem at all. From what they were making it sound like when they initially joined the conference and had that press conference. So I would think you'd find out that pretty quick. Scheduling, probably another deal, because even if you're operating under the assumption right now that Texas and Oklahoma will be around, even if we're looking around at the reality, like nobody really knows what's going on behind closed doors at Texas and OU and what their plan is, how much negotiating is going on between the Big 12 and them on trying to get out earlier. There's so much of that going on. I don't know that you can really feel good about putting together a schedule unless you just want to do something and get some PR for it, and then you're okay with taking it all apart. Like, I guess the point, it's a long-winded way of me saying you don't really know what's going to happen with Texas and Oklahoma, even if you feel like you know right now. So you can put together a whole schedule and know, because I think, like, Juan, you'd be anxious as a Houston fan, like, okay, let's get this game on the schedule. Like, give me a game on the schedule with Texas so we can figure it out. The problem is you could do that, and then, 2 months from now, Texas works out a giant check. They're going to write you a giant check and get out early. Then that game doesn't happen, and then you're having to go back through and do the scheduling deal all over again. Now, is that the worst thing in the world? No, it's not. And maybe if you want to generate some excitement, I mean, I'm thinking through a lot of things here. If you want to generate some excitement by going ahead and releasing those, you can definitely do that. And I think it would accomplish that purpose. You also maybe could do that, and then it makes it more real for Texas and Oklahoma, and they're going to be more willing to do whatever it takes to get out, which again could be good or bad, depending on how high that check goes, how many zeros are on that check, how many digits are on that check. So I do think that could even, play a factor in how all this winds up being negotiated. But it's an interesting point to raise. And I know as a Houston fan, you would be really geeked up to have one of those games, like get something actually tangibly on my schedule that I can plan for. I certainly understand where I would imagine that question is coming from. So appreciate the donations in the comments there, Juan. If you want to be like Juan, click the $ below the chat box where it says say something. Let's see. We can go into some transfer news here, because the other thing that's happening right now, as even in Big 12 circles, I guess if we're talking about the scope of college athletics right now, everybody's talking about the more global, like Mark Emmert. If you're a Big 12 fan, you're talking about the teams that are coming into the league and what that's going to look like. The other thing that's going on for everybody right now, just rampant and crazy, is the transfer portal, particularly in basketball right now. We're seeing this all over the place. I feel for Texas Tech fans, because they are in a stressful situation hoops-wise, where it's like, now Kevin O'Banner is coming back, which is great news, and I was happy to see that for Tech, but Terrence Shannon is out there taking visits, still apparently considering Texas Tech. I don't know how optimistic Tech fans are about that working out, but then today, Kevin McCullough puts his name into the portal. He's a guy that also was an early entrant in the NBA draft. So as a player, I think that's very smart, taking into consideration all of your options, seeing what the waters are like out there. If you are going to test the NBA draft and get some feedback, you definitely want to do that. And if I am a player and I see what happened with Nigel Pack, who was K-State's best player, who transferred to Miami, and it came out that he got $800,000 for a 2-year contract, essentially, and a car out of the whole deal for NIL, then if you're a player, like, you could be looking around like, man, I mean, hey, like, that dude's a pretty good player, but I'm a pretty good player. What's my going rate? If 17 points per game in the Big 12 is getting you $800K, like, what's my going rate? Let me scope this out and see my options. Doesn't mean you don't love Texas Tech or the school that you're at, but like, money talks. I mean, so I feel like, oh, okay, I see the distant sun said Shannon said he wasn't coming back. Okay. I was reading an article a second ago from the Lubbock Avalanche Journal that said, like, as of March 25th, he was still considering Texas Tech, so I wasn't sure what the latest update was on that. Either way, I feel bad. I hope Tech fans that Nigel Pack, like K-State and Nigel Pack, was not the cause of that with McCullough at all. But I would think, like, a lot of these kids are paying attention. And in fact, Jeff Goodman, put some words to that, a guy who was obviously very connected in the college basketball world, he said, Nigel Pack has a lot of these kids thinking that they are worth $400,000 a year in a car. And a lot of kids entering the portal because of that. Now, maybe some of them will wind up going back to their original school if they find out that that's not actually the case. But at worst, for them, I would think it drives the price up for their current school. So it's crazy. I mean, it's crazy. There was another Goodman tweet out earlier this week that said, like, a high major coach texted him and said, like, none of us have any idea, like, what the rules are right now with NIL, what we really can and can't do specifically, and that it's just bonkers because of that. And I fully understand. I mean, it does not take a rocket scientist to look out there and see how bonkers the landscape is at the moment. Now, I tend to be somebody, this is not as Big 12 focused. I'm getting more big picture here, but I tend to be somebody that thinks we're just in such the beginning stages of all of this that we don't really know how it's going to work out, how it's going to play out. I lean toward there will probably be a market correction of some kind if somebody starts to realize, like, hey, $800,000 it's a huge risk. My return on investment may not be very high here, and that there is some sort of correction. Also, we don't know what it's going to look like as far as legislation. Who the hell is going to take the head of the NCAA job that Mark Emmert is leaving? Will that person actually be able to enforce anything? Will there be some kind of legislation? Can you legislate it at all? I just think there are a lot of question marks as to how this is going to work out, that I'm not as gloom and doom about it right away right now. But it doesn't seem like this in its current state is the ideal solution permanently. So, like, I would hope that there is some kind of change there. I'm just not going to knee-jerk overreact. I think right now it's a very easy thing to do because it is so different. And coaches, especially, who are not used to this at all, we're seeing a lot of high-profile coaches speaking out about it, whether it's the portal or whether it is NIL. Saban, Dabo, like all those kind of guys. Bill Self spoke out about it within the last week. Those guys are not used to having to deal with this. They're used to having more control, and the players not having as much control over what's going on. So I understand why it's very threatening to a lot of people right now. And I understand why it's very threatening. If you're an Iowa State fan and you just watched Tyrese Hunter leave and he's talking about visiting like Kansas and North Carolina, that sucks, man. Like that really is rough. Also, doubly rough. Iowa State, man, what a week last week. They lose Tyrese Hunter and then find out that they're not in the AAU anymore, which effectively kills any pipe dream about the Big Ten. That is rough. Like, I legitimately feel for Iowa State fans, especially on the Tyrese Hunter thing. That's not fun. Look, my squad, K-State, we just lost the guy who's getting $800K. We just lost the guy who's getting $800K to Miami, who is by far the best player in the program. So, like, I also have felt that. As a K-State fan, I have felt that. But I also see guys that are considering schools that they maybe otherwise wouldn't because of NIL. I also think, like, I've heard a lot of good things about the position K-State is in NIL-wise with how much money is being donated. I think there are some situations where it's helping schools. There are some situations where it's not, and we just don't know where all this is going to go. Like, it's a very young, early stage of this thing that it seems out of control, but we don't know where it's actually going to finish. I think we need to just hang tight on it a little bit and see where all of this goes. So I'm being more patient with all of that than a lot of people are. But that is something to monitor, like what's going to happen at Texas Tech with McCullough. I saw that today. Now, football-wise, here's a transfer that I think logically makes a lot more sense to people. It's an easier one to follow and in a way has a happy ending. At least I certainly hope that it does for Gary Bohannon. But at Baylor, they decided on a quarterback. So a report comes out yesterday that Blake Shapen, who came in late in the year for Gary Bohannon, won the starting job. That was punctuated by his spring game performance on Saturday. And Baylor went ahead and made the decision, and they told everybody, which is a huge part of this story because a lot of coaches wouldn't necessarily do that and afford their backup quarterback the opportunity then to transfer. May 1st is the transfer deadline if you're not playing a spring sport. So if you don't enter the portal by May 1st, you're not guaranteed to be eligible for next year if you do transfer. It's not impossible, but there are no guarantees on that front. So May 1st is an important day coming up here for all these guys. And for one thing, I think Baylor is making the right decision here. Now, I didn't watch all the spring ball. I didn't see the Baylor spring game. I can't profess to you to have that intimate knowledge of the situation. But I watched Blake Shapen play last year. It was not perfect, But first half of the Big 12 championship game, he sure looked awfully good against an awesome Oklahoma State defense where the defensive coordinator winds up getting the Ohio State job. I also saw him in Manhattan, Kansas when he gets thrust into action, do it just a great job, like really managing things. And more so than it's not even fair of me to say like he managed the game. Always seems to have such a negative connotation to it. I thought he looked pretty damn good in moving Baylor up and down the field and not screwing it up, not crashing the car, getting them a win and keeping them on track to go win a Big 12 championship. It just felt like to me he had higher upside. And nothing against Bohannon. I think he did an extremely admirable job last year. Deserves a ton of credit for what he did. And the numbers aren't bad at all. He completed 63% of his passes for 2,200 yards, 18 touchdowns, 7 picks. That is very solid, especially when Baylor had the running game that they had last year and the defense that they had last year. Like Bohannon did a heck of a job. But Baylor has a really talented quarterback room right now because it's not just those two guys that we're mentioning, but you think about the younger guys, Kyron Drones and CJ Rogers. I had to remember their name there for a second, but Kyron Drones, CJ Rogers. If you look at the highlights of their spring game, it looks like that quarterback room is just extremely, extremely loaded right now. So in college football in 2022, you can't have a loaded quarterback room for long. It's not going to last long. Somebody will want to transfer. Somebody will want to go play somewhere. And Bohannon seemed to be the odd man out here where it makes sense. He's not super young where you can say, hey, I should just wait around and wait my turn. Shapen is pretty young. So you're looking at, well, he just got named the starter. He's pretty young. It makes all the sense in the world why he wouldn't want to leave and go play. And the numbers that I just rattled off indicate he can play at the Big 12 level. Like he can play at the Power 5 level. He can go find a home and be a really good quarterback somewhere. So totally makes sense why Bohannon would go. Totally makes sense why Baylor would give the job to Shapen because, again, I think he's the higher upside play there if you're thinking long-term about this. But the most, I think, interesting thing about the whole story or the most poignant part about this whole story is the timing of it all. That Dave Aranda basically was a real stand-up guy with this by allowing Gary Bohannon, somebody who gave a lot to his program last year, the opportunity to go transfer now, letting him know now instead of dragging it on into the fall, saying we're going to make a decision here at the end of spring, basically knowing I'm going to likely lose. I mean, let's be honest, in 2022, you're going to lose in all likelihood the guy that does not get the job. So that affords that player the opportunity to leave and then still be able to play somewhere next year. It basically freed up a year of Gary Bohannon's time. Whereas if it went into the fall and he had to wait and then he doesn't get the job and then he wants to enter the portal and now you got to wait, a whole nother season to actually get back out there on the field. Now, with the depth of their quarterback room, yes, does that make it a little bit easier to do that? It sure does. And that deserves to be pointed out. Like if this were you only had these two quarterbacks and then a big drop off to a couple walk-ons in the room or something like that, hey, it would be a tougher decision to make. But by all accounts, like I give Dave Aranda the benefit of the doubt because he does seem like a very stand-up guy. He seems like somebody that the players love. And this is like some legitimate, like backing up the talk, walking the walk when you've talked the talk about that. And I think it also is something that can be a smart long-term move for Aranda anyway, because if this is the reputation that you develop as a coach, kids are going to be watching this. Like this is a new world where they know that they have a lot of power. And if they see you as a coach now that's trying to stand in the way of their freedom and them kind of having the upper hand in some of these situations, that's not going to play well for you long-term because there are enough coaches that are going to do that. And some of that I think is like old school, new school. Some of the newer school coaches, which I would definitely consider Aranda to be, they're more understanding of the game. They're hip to the game. And Aranda, to me, with this move, comes across as very hip to the game there. So, he could have been like, and this is a guy, obviously, you guys know I champion a lot here. I think he's an outstanding coach. But one of the worst things that we've seen happen in a while was the saga with Austin Kendall when he tried to leave Oklahoma to go to West Virginia. And Lincoln Riley was not going to let him go and fought all of that. It was not a great look. Lincoln was not typically somebody that was very upfront seemingly with these guys in these situations and then allowing them to utilize their power, kind of flex their power. So that does not appear to be Aranda at all. I already really liked Dave Aranda. This was a move that made me like him even more, the fact that it came down like that. And I wish the best for Gary Bohannon. Like I will love watching him wherever he goes because I have a heck of a lot of respect for what it is that he did last year. So things seem to be in very, very good shape with the Baylor football program. I just look, we don't, I mean, should we expect anything less from Baylor's athletic department right now? It just seems like almost like the perfect athletic department. Basketball, men's basketball, the national championship, Scott Drew, that thing's totally rolling. Women's basketball, obviously, we know the success that program's had. And then football with the 12 wins, the Big 12 championship, Aranda, a guy who seems to just totally get it. I mean, I don't know that there's much better of a combination out there right now, seemingly, than Aranda and Scott Drew on paper as the two coaches of your revenue sports. So things appear to be in very good shape at Baylor. Now, I see Matt says Blake Shapen will be the starter 22, 23, and 24. In a world 10 years ago, I would have said, yep, absolutely. The problem is now, and this is like nothing against Shapen, nothing against Baylor at all. It's like, how many quarterbacks do start for 3 years anymore? How many 3-year starters will we see at quarterback moving forward anymore with all of this? Between guys wanting to leave early, the transfer portal, the NIL factor that's mixed in here too. It just not giving any specifics on the situation at all. It does seem like the odds would be long on that just for anybody at almost any position in college football at all ever right now, just the way that the sport is, which, global point that we could make or argue about on that front. But hey, for Baylor's sake, I certainly hope so. And that's probably another part of the calculus here too. If it's pretty close, if it appears to be close, tie goes to the guy that could be the starter for the next 3 years. G Brew, isn't Baylor's athletic department scandal ridden? Well, seems like they're pretty far from that right now, man. I mean, I know a lot of people don't love Baylor for some of the stuff that's happened in the past, but you can't argue with the success that's happening on the field right now. And no, there's no scandal that I'm aware of at this point. Juan says not anymore. Baylor has made one hell of a turnaround as far as where things are at with that. I did mention Mark Emmert stepping down as the NCAA. And by the way, maybe 5 to 10 more minutes here with you on the channel tonight. So if you want to get your question or comment up at the top of the chat, make sure that I see it and support the work that I'm doing here on this channel to bring you Big 12 content. You can donate by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. If you got something on your mind, you got a question or comment you want to get to me, if you're the Texas fan that was in there and you want me to recognize that I see you in the chat saying that I suck and I talk about you too much, hey, donate the money, pay the money, click that $ below the chat box where it says say something. I'll talk about it. Guaranteed. I will talk about it. And if you're watching this recorded after the fact, it's John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo to support the channel as well. Also, if you could like the video, you guys have done a good job of that tonight. But if you could like the video, if you're in here and you have not liked the video, it doesn't cost you a dime. You can go like the video right now. It helps me out with the algorithm, etc. Okay, so Mark Emmert is stepping down as the head of the NCAA. And the timing of all this, when we have like 1,500 kids in the transfer portal in basketball and NIL is going wild and the Nigel Pack thing really blew up where we found out he's getting $800K in a car and all this, it seems very symbolically appropriate that Mark Emmert is now stepping down. Things are wild. Coaches are texting Jeff Goodman being like, we don't even really know the rules on NIL. Nobody really knows what we can and can't do. It has this very wild, westy sort of feel. It seemingly makes sense that the guy who's in charge of it and basically, led the charge to mismanage all of this. Mark Emmert is the guy who, for a long time, has been here not trying to take some of this in chunks, allow some level of NIL, allow more flexibility for players gradually. Instead, just kept trying to hold the dam, and then oversaw the dam breaking. Yeah, man, it's probably about time for you to get out of there. This comes on the heels of Jack Swarbrick's comments, the athletic director at Notre Dame, of talking about like heading towards like a super conference and no NCAA anymore. I think a lot of people really feel that way. Like in 10 years, will there actually be any sort of governing body that we currently understand like the NCAA right now? I mean, who the hell knows? And the part about this that I just don't understand where we're going to go from here is like, who takes that job? Who takes that job? I saw somebody compare it to like after Netflix really started to pop, who was going to take the job as the CEO of Blockbuster. And that's kind of what this feels like to me. Like if you're taking the job as the head of the NCAA, it is taking the job as the CEO of Blockbuster. Like you're just going to ride things out on the Titanic. You're just hitching a deck chair to the Titanic and saying, hey man, like, let me go down with the ship. So I don't know what kind of dynamic leadership you could actually get in charge of the NCAA that's going to change much of what's going on right now. I mean, the one saving grace there is like Mark Emmert was making money hand over fist. That's for damn sure. But I don't know. Would money talk enough? Like the type of person that I think you really need in there to institute some sort of actual change or really stem the tide might be impossible for anybody. But if you're going to get some super dynamic leader, I would think it's typically not going to be someone that's just driven purely by money and by the money that would come with that title. You know, I almost said money and prestige, but I don't know that there's really prestige that's coming with that anymore. Like the NCAA is just so vilified at this point, and not only vilified, but now it's kind of turned into a joke. You know, it's gone from just being like big bad thing that everybody hates to like big bad thing that everybody hates and makes fun of because they have no control of anything anymore and they got destroyed by the Supreme Court. So, you know, that's where we're at. That's where we're at with this deal right now. I don't really foresee a dynamic leader stepping in with the NCAA at this moment. So that's really about all I have. There are a lot of guys did a really good pod about Emmert stepping down. There are a lot of places you can get some good information on that, but that's my main take. One, it feels very symbolically appropriate right now. Two, I can't foresee anybody worth their salt really taking that job at the moment based on where things are going right now. Okay, a couple of things I want to address here. One, Juan says, thank you for the donation, Juan. You've been extremely generous tonight. Really appreciate it. Juan says, hey, John, if that UT fan doesn't make a donation, how about just talk a little more about how Texas has avoided playing Houston for decades now? All right. Hey, I'll do it. You know, and to be honest, Juan, why would Texas have played you guys? Like there is nothing in it for them except potential losses because for the last 15 years, Texas has fielded a football team that would be perfectly capable of losing to Houston every single year. Perfectly capable of losing to Houston every single year. Which Texas team are we singling out post 2009 since Colt McCoy walked his happy butt out of Austin, Texas? Which Texas team are we pointing out and saying, oh, they wouldn't have lost to Houston? Guaranteed they wouldn't have lost to Houston. We've seen Texas lose to Kansas multiple times here. We have seen them lose to a variety of squads that are very embarrassing and just a bit of very mediocre football team and program. And we know that like so much of this is like, hey, they can jump up and beat Oklahoma some of those years when they're not very good because they care about that game and they're motivated. But that's the problem. You know, this country club culture at Texas, you got to give them reason to be excited. And I don't think Houston, nothing against Houston at all. This is just from a Texas perspective. There's the arrogance of looking down on them. They would have never been really fired up to play that game. Maybe when Tom Herman was at his peak at Houston, like maybe those teams would have done enough to get Texas excited to play the game, but I don't know. I don't know about that. So there's your monologue and diatribe on that. It does not surprise me that Texas would be scared of that at all. Of course they would have been, and of course Houston would have been able to beat them many a time over the last 15 years. Tony, so I wanted to address Tony here because Tony Altimore is somebody that you guys have seen way back. I'm trying to remember when that was, Tony, maybe like August, September. Really good presentation about the ins and outs of conference realignment, how it's much more complicated than a lot of people think, particularly for the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, and really the alliance schools. So I wanted to address this because you got my attention I see that you tagged me here. Tony says, big, interesting issue brought up on Sikkim briefly, but with huge implications. Under NIL, scholarship limits are now irrelevant. Can just pay the tuition. Maybe rough for Title IX. That is interesting, man. Because if you could just say like, hey, kid, you're not going to have a scholarship, but, you know, for instance, like at Oklahoma, they're giving every kid. Now, I believe at Oklahoma, it was every scholarship player was getting $50,000, right? But if you just had some donor step up to say, hey, we'll just pay every single guy on the roster $50,000, well, then if you're getting $50,000 a year, like there's your scholarship. I mean, essentially, there's your scholarship. So, yeah, you could sort of skirt around scholarship limitations. That's a can of worms because, you know, you think about the pre-scholarship limitation days, that's where it really hits home for me as a K-State fan. And now I didn't have to live through that, being someone born in 1989. But hearing the stories about, you know, Oklahoma, Nebraska, just hoarding having 150 scholarship kids on their roster because they could just hoard some of the third and fourth tier guys that they wouldn't really be after in a world with scholarship limitations that would otherwise be playing at K-State, Iowa State, et cetera. So you could just like hoard guys like that. And that obviously created a big imbalance. Now, what I would say that would make me think like, okay, you may not have to worry about that as much as just simply playing time. Because the great equalizer to that, to me, Tony, would be transfer portal. Everybody has a free one-time transfer. So if you're trying to load up on too many guys, inevitably they're going to run into a problem with playing time. So if you have 150 scholarship players, how are you going to have enough playing time to go around and make everybody happy? Then you'll be losing guys to the portal pretty quickly. So, like in a weird way, okay, your thought is impact on Title IX. I got you. Yeah, I mean, man, I'll be honest. Like, I don't, Tony, I may need you to just like walk me through some of that here. On that, and I don't, this maybe, here nearing the end of the chat, I don't know that I have enough time to totally get into that can of worms, but I think it's very interesting. I'm open to whatever you have to say about it. Does sound like it could be a big mess, like you say. And the problem here, Tony, let me direct that back to the Mark Emmert thing. Like, who's gonna be there to sort this all out? Emmert's basically saying like, hey, I just want out. I want out. No more of this. No more of this. And who are they going to hire to come in and take over Blockbuster? So it is a mess. It is a mess. I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. Tony, if you guys have not watched some of Tony's stuff, I would encourage you to, on this channel, go back and watch what he did with me. I know he was on with the Sikkim 365 guys as well. Great resource on conference realignment. Tony, I would actually be curious about, I don't know if you heard me mention earlier, but like there is a thought in Lawrence, Kansas right now that like they're going to be some package deal with USC to the Big Ten, and that USC to the Big Ten talk is fired back up. And I know that was one of those things that you really pushed back on and opened my eyes to, like all the different things that connect the Pac-12 and the Big Ten as far as research and academia and the money that's involved there and endowments, and how it just doesn't make sense for a Pac-12 school to go to the Big Ten like that. And I see you're saying you can't imagine that. That doesn't surprise me at all. It was a wonderfully educational presentation that you walked me through on all of that. So anybody that's engrossed in that, I would highly encourage you to go check out Tony's stuff, because it'll make a big difference in how you view all this, and you'll be much, much smarter off for it. Okay, I think I'm about run out of steam here. Tony says I could see SC going along with at least UCLA or Stanford. Okay, well, that's interesting to me. At least opening up the possibility there that something could happen, as long as it does not include Kansas, I'll be okay with it. We should chat, Tony, at some point here. Hit me up on Twitter at JLKurtz for anybody that wants to get a hold of me. But yeah, would definitely be open to doing that. Okay, it's late. We've been on for a long time here. I appreciate all you guys who hung out on the chat tonight. John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. If you're seeing this and want to support the channel, thank you to everybody who did support tonight. I should be back at it on Sunday. I don't foresee any issues with that. I've got a much more chill weekend than I did last weekend, taking on some TV broadcast responsibilities. So with that, have a great night. Have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the NFL draft. See what my Chiefs are going to do at 29-30. I'm very interested in this tomorrow. Take care.